Hey guys, tonight we're heading to a quiet neighborhood in Amityville, New York, where a house sits still against the winter wind, its black shutters like sleeping eyes and its steep roof casting long shadows under the moonlight. Snow muffles the silence here, but deep beneath the floorboards and behind the freshly painted walls, something breathes, slow, steady, and waiting. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It was December 1975 when the Lutz family first arrived. George and Kathy, newly married, stood on the front steps of 112 Ocean Avenue with the kind of tired hope that clings to second chances. The house had charm, a Dutch colonial, with white clapboards and an oversized boathouse. 3 stories, 5 bedrooms, and an asking price that made them suspiciously lucky. The realtor had explained haltingly that there had been incidents, but legally, she'd done her duty. The couple nodded solemnly. They'd heard the rumors. Everyone had. Their children, Danny, Chris, and Missy, were already racing through the snow-covered yard, their laughter echoing under the bare trees. The air was sharp with cold and pine. It smelled like Christmas, but a few windows on the second floor remained dark, as if withholding judgment. The movers came and went. By evening, boxes cluttered the front hall. Kathy set down the dinner plates and glanced up the staircase where shadows deepened fast. "We should bless the house," she said quietly. George gave a soft snort. "With what holy water from the grocery store?" "I'm serious," she replied, not smiling. "There were murders, George." George sighed, then nodded. "Fine, we'll call a priest." They did. The next afternoon, Father Mancuso arrived just before dusk, his coat dusted with snow and breath fogging in the cold. He was hesitant at first, walking through each room with a bottle of water in one hand and a leather-bound prayer book in the other. He muttered Latin beneath his breath, flicking droplets across the walls. It wasn't until he entered the sewing room on the second floor that something shifted. There was no wind yet. The temperature dropped by 10 degrees in an instant. The smell of sour milk hit him so hard he staggered. He looked at the far wall, suddenly sure someone else was there. Not a shadow. Not a trick of light. A presence. It watched him. "Get out!" A voice rasped, not from behind, not from inside the room, but from inside his chest. It vibrated through his ribs. He stumbled out face pale and sweating despite the cold. He didn't finish the blessing. He didn't say goodbye. He got in his car and left without a word. Kathy watched the taillights vanish down Ocean Avenue, her arms folded tightly over her chest. That night the house exhaled. It was a sound almost too soft to hear. A subtle groan in the floorboards, pipes ticking as if cooling down. But George, lying awake, swore he heard someone walking down the hall outside their bedroom, bare feet over wood. He got up 3 times to check. Nothing. Downstairs, the fireplace burned low, its embers crackling with the smell of damp soot. In the kitchen, the light above the stove flickered once, then again, then stayed on. Missy, their youngest, began to talk to an imaginary friend named Jody. "She has red eyes," Missy whispered to Kathy one morning. "She lives in the closet." Kathy looked into the closet herself. It was empty. She laughed it off and told Missy to finish her cereal. On the 3rd night, George began waking up at exactly 3:15 a.m. No alarm, no sound, just a jolt from sleep, like something had nudged him. He would sit up, listen, wait. At 3:17, the boathouse door creaked. He checked it the next morning. Locked. The next night, the same thing. 3:15, eyes open. A soft creak outside. A chill across the room, like the air was breathing inward. The children grew quiet. Less laughter, more glances behind shoulders. Chris complained about hearing whispers. Danny said his bedroom window opened by itself. George thought they were just adjusting kids being dramatic, But his own temper grew short. He hadn't shaved in days. He felt constantly cold, couldn't get warm no matter how many logs he tossed into the fireplace. He stopped going to work. The firewood wasn't enough. He needed more. The axe became his companion. He paced, muttered, listened. Kathy had dreams, bloody, tangled, screaming dreams of the house as it had been a year before gunshots in the night, a mother weeping children calling for help. She woke one morning with bruises down her thighs, though she hadn't fallen. The bathroom door swelled shut without cause. The toilet water turned black. Crosses on the wall hung upside down, though no one had touched them. Windows stuck or slammed shut on their own. Doors locked from the inside. The sewing room remained untouched. No one entered it now. Not after Missy said Jody slept there during the day. A month in, and the house seemed to resist them. It didn't want redecorating. It didn't want peace. It wanted remembrance. It wanted noise and pain, and the echoes of what had come before. On the 28th night, Kathy sat at the kitchen table staring into her untouched tea. Snow fell heavy outside. George hadn't spoken in hours. The children were upstairs silent, and then the walls began to bleed, not violently, not in sheets. Just a slow, weeping trail of dark liquid from the corners where ceiling met wall thick and tar black. Kathy rose without a sound. Her footsteps were soft, her breath calm. She reached for the phone. The next morning, the Lutz family packed what they could carry and walked out into the snow, leaving plates on the table toys on the floor, the front door slightly ajar. They never returned, and the house once again fell still. The silence that followed the Lutz's departure settled over Ocean Avenue, like snowfall, quiet, slow, and almost graceful. Neighbors noticed the drawn curtains, the piled-up newspapers, the soft clack of the mailbox swinging idly in the wind. The house looked empty, but not abandoned, just paused, as if it were waiting. A few months passed before anyone stepped inside again. Investigators came. First, paranormal researchers, cameras slung over their shoulders, recorders ticking away in their coat pockets. They were skeptics at first, curious professionals from out of town. But the house had a way of adjusting people. It didn't announce itself. It didn't threaten. It simply revealed. The first night, a cameraman named Paul wandered upstairs to take still shots of the bedrooms. He paused in the hallway near the sewing room, just for a second. That was all it took. A thud behind the door, a soft clicking sound like fingernails on wood. He waited, opened the door slowly. Nothing. He returned to his room and discovered every photo he had taken was blank. White. No exposure errors, no lens cap left on. Just white, as if the camera had opened its eye and found nothing to see. Downstairs, Lorraine Warren stood in the kitchen with a crucifix in one hand and her eyes shut tight. She whispered beneath her breath, not a prayer, not quite, more like a warning. The kind you give to something sleeping lightly. There is something in this house, she said softly. It's not a ghost. It's older. Her husband Ed was setting up motion detectors in the hallway. They blinked softly in the dark. That night, they slept in the living room with their equipment humming. The air turned thick around midnight. A faint knocking echoed from the basement door. Tap, 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 tap. The dog began to growl. A low, uncertain growl, like it wasn't sure whether to bark or run. Its fur stood up along its spine. No one moved. The knock came again. Ed stood slowly, flashlight in hand. The basement door was shut, but not locked. He turned the handle gently and opened it just a crack. Cold. Not the cold of winter, this was cellar. Cold, damp, and earthy. A breath from somewhere underground. He descended one step, then two. Wood creaked beneath his feet. The smell of iron and mildew filled his nose. The beam of his flashlight caught on something, just a glimpse. The corner of a brick wall at the far end cracked near the bottom. Lorraine's voice called down to him, firm but strained. "Don't go farther." He didn't. The next morning, Lorraine insisted they leave. "We can't cleanse this," she told Ed. "It doesn't want to be cast out." It was never human. The Warrens filed a report, archived their tapes, and left Amityville behind. They'd speak of it occasionally quietly in interviews when asked, but they never returned. And still the house stood. Snow melted into spring. The trees blossomed again. Ocean Avenue became green and pleasant. Joggers passed the home without looking. Children avoided it instinctively. The real estate agent changed the listing, dropped the price, added new photos. A young couple from Queens took interest next. Eric and Julia Sanderson. No children. Newlyweds. She was a teacher. He worked in advertising. They toured the home on a soft May afternoon. The place was clean, freshly painted, and quiet. "Too quiet," Julia commented on the stillness. "You'd think there'd be creaks or something," she said lightly. Eric smiled. "Old houses creak. This one just hasn't woken up yet." They moved in that June. The first night was warm. Windows open, breeze flowing gently through the hallways. Julia unpacked linens, humming under her breath. Eric lit candles for the dining room. They hadn't had time to fix the overhead light. Around midnight, Julia walked past the staircase and paused. She thought she heard something upstairs. Not footsteps, not a voice. A sound she couldn't place, like breathing, but deeper, slower. As though something very large had just exhaled behind the door of the sewing room. She stood still. The air changed. "Heavier." "Eric," she called. In the kitchen, he replied. Normal voice, distant, unaware. The sound stopped. Julia stepped back. She didn't go upstairs again that night. The following morning, Eric found their living room rug soaked. Not wet soaked, as though it had been submerged. The water was cold and smelled faintly metallic. No pipe had burst. No window had leaked. They dried it, shrugged it off, told themselves it was just a plumbing thing, a quirk. That evening, as they settled into bed, Julia checked the closet just out of habit. She opened the door and stared for a moment. Inside, the clothes hung still. Neat. But on the inside of the door, at chest height, 4 small scratch marks, deep and uneven, had not been there the day before. She didn't tell Eric. Over the next week, the house grew heavy. Lights flickered, once, then died. Candles burned down in half the time. The air smelled of earth, not rot, just the thick scent of wet ground, the kind you'd find in places where things are buried. Eric became irritable, tired. He couldn't sleep. Woke up cold no matter how many blankets he added. One night, he woke up outside, standing barefoot in the backyard mud on his hands. He had no memory of getting there. Julia began to hear knocking. Always 3 knocks. Always between 3 and 3:30 a.m. She stopped looking at clocks. One night, as she brushed her hair in the mirror, she saw a second reflection behind her. Just for a breath. Not Eric, not anything familiar. Just eyes, deep set and glowing red, wide apart, watching. She turned fast. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but in the mirror, the closet door slowly creaked open. Julia didn't scream. She closed her eyes, let the brush fall to the floor, and backed out of the room. That night, she slept on the living room couch with every light on. Upstairs in the sewing room, the temperature dropped again. And something began to whisper just under the sound of the wind, too low to hear, but impossible to ignore. By the end of the second week, the Sandersons no longer spoke about the house. They moved through it carefully, like guests overstaying their welcome. The walls seemed to tighten around them. Hallways felt narrower, stairwells steeper. The air grew dense, damp, like a cellar sealed shut too long. Julia stopped sleeping in the bedroom altogether. She kept to the couch downstairs, bundled in blankets with the television on low. The flickering screen gave her comfort, a human presence, even if only artificial. She didn't tell Eric everything. Not the shape she thought she saw in the bathroom mirror. Not the voice that whispered her name from inside the vent. Not the cold breath on her neck when she showered, even though no window was open. Eric had changed. Subtly, then drastically. He began speaking less, his eyes red-rimmed, pacing through the house at odd hours. She'd wake in the middle of the night to find him standing in the dining room staring up the staircase. His hands clenched, jaw tight. When she spoke to him, he would blink slowly, like surfacing from somewhere deep, and mumble something she didn't understand. One morning she found him in the basement, kneeling by the far wall. A hammer and chisel lay beside him. Dust covered his shirt. "What are you doing?" she asked. "There's something back here," he said flatly, touching the crack along the base of the bricks. Something old. She crouched beside him. The bricks were indeed different, slightly discolored, unevenly mortared, like they'd been added later. "It's just foundation work," she offered, trying to sound casual. Eric didn't respond. His fingers traced the seams slowly, reverently. That evening, she called her sister, whispering into the receiver from the kitchen. She didn't know what to say. Not exactly, just that something was wrong. With the house, with Eric, with her. Her sister's voice on the other end was cautious, kind. She suggested they come visit for a few days. Get away, just a break, Julia agreed. She would speak to Eric in the morning, but that night changed everything. It began at 3:11 a.m. Julia sat bolt upright on the couch, heart thudding. The television had turned to static. White noise hummed against the silence, too loud, too sharp. Her mouth was dry. She hadn't dreamed. She hadn't been asleep long. But something had pulled her awake. The hallway light upstairs flicked on, then off, then on again. Soft thumps followed. Slow, deliberate. Footsteps crossing from one bedroom to another. "Eric," she called out. No answer. The footsteps stopped. Then faintly a voice not Eric's called back, "Come up." It was her own voice. Every hair on her arms rose. She didn't move. The air shifted, grew thick. The static from the television faded into silence, not off, just swallowed. And then a crash upstairs. Julia sprang up and ran for the stairs before she could stop herself. Her breath came fast, shallow. Each step groaned underfoot. She reached the landing and turned toward the master bedroom. The door was open. Inside, Eric was standing facing the wall, barefoot, shirtless. His hands pressed against the plaster like he was listening to it. "Eric," she whispered. He didn't move. She stepped closer. The wallpaper had been ripped away in long strips. Beneath it, strange markings had been scratched into the wall spirals, circle symbols that made her eyes hurt to look at. Some were drawn in black soot, others in what looked like dried blood. Eric's nails were broken, his fingertips raw. She touched his shoulder. He turned slowly, face pale and expressionless. His eyes were unfocused, as though he were watching something on the other side of her. "She said we're not supposed to leave," he murmured. "Who?" Julia breathed. He didn't answer. Suddenly from downstairs, every cabinet in the kitchen slammed open at once. Boom, boom, boom. Then silence. Then laughter, small, high-pitched, childlike. Julia turned and bolted down the stairs, barefoot, her pulse thrumming in her ears. In the kitchen, everything was still. Cabinets open, silverware scattered, fridge humming. Nothing else. And then from behind her, a whisper. "Don't run." She spun around. No one. The air was bitterly cold. The floor beneath her vibrated gently like a heartbeat under tile. She backed away, slowly, reached for her keys on the counter. The front door stood open, just slightly, as if waiting for her. She stepped out barefoot into the dewy grass, the summer night still and cold against her skin. The stars above were bright, too bright, and for a moment, she had the disorienting sense that the sky was too low, that if she reached up, she might touch it. She didn't go back inside. She walked to the car, hands trembling, and sat in the driver's seat until dawn. Eric never came out. When the sun rose, she returned briefly with a neighbor. The house was empty, silent. Eric's things were still there, wallet, phone, shoes. But he was gone. The symbols on the wall had vanished, the scratch marks in the closet gone. The hallway smelled of roses. The house had gone back to sleep, and Ocean Avenue whispered nothing. Julia stayed with her sister for a while far from Amityville. She didn't sleep much. Her hands trembled when she held a coffee cup. She watched doorways too long jumped at the hum of the refrigerator. She didn't speak about Eric. Not to the police, not to her family, not even to herself. When they asked, she said he left, just walked away. Everyone assumed it was another tragic break stress, maybe infidelity, maybe worse. But Julia knew that wasn't the truth. The truth lingered in the back of her mind like a stain that wouldn't wash out something seen through the corner of the eye. Always there. Always. Waiting. After 3 weeks, she filed a missing person report. After 6 months, the case went cold. A year passed. The house remained untouched. No one wanted it. Realtors tried. Photos were retouched. New siding applied the front lawn mowed into perfection. But prospective buyers never lasted long. Some wouldn't make it past the foyer. Others scheduled viewings and canceled the morning of. Those who stepped inside described a wrongness they couldn't name. A weight in the air. A sense of being watched. One woman fainted in the basement. Another left her child unattended for 2 minutes and returned to find the boy staring into the fireplace, whispering something she couldn't understand. Eventually, the house was delisted. Again, it sat quiet, empty, breathing. And then came Aaron Wells. He wasn't looking for a house. Not really. He had come to Long Island to settle his brother's estate. Just paperwork, legal meetings, one long weekend, then home. But on the second afternoon, while driving past Ocean Avenue, something pulled at his attention. He slowed the car. The house stood framed by trees, its white facade glowing faintly in the golden hour light. Black shutters closed like eyelids. The boathouse down the slope reflected off the water like a memory. Aaron parked without thinking, walked up the path, gravel crunching beneath his shoes. The gate wasn't locked. The porch boards creaked under his step, and the front door, heavy old, stood slightly ajar, just enough to beckon. He hesitated, then stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Not unpleasant, just old. Wood dust, something floral under it all, like a dried bouquet left in the attic for years. Light slanted through the windows in thick golden lines. The living room was neat, empty. No furniture, no curtains, just space. Quiet. He walked slowly, breathing shallow. His footsteps echoed oddly, as if the air were absorbing sound too fast. In the dining room, the chandelier hung motionless, each crystal catching flecks of sun. The walls bore faint traces where frames once hung. Upstairs, the hallway stretched long and narrow. He passed empty rooms, doors ajar, each one colder than the last. He didn't open the sewing room. He didn't need to. There was something behind that door that didn't want him to look. He obeyed. He stood at the end of the hallway by a window overlooking the front yard. Everything outside looked normal, still. Then, just before he turned back, he saw a reflection in the glass, his own, yes, but behind it, a figure. Tall, thin, barely visible, like smoke trapped in light. He spun around. Nothing. He left the house, quickly locking the front door out of habit, though he had no key. When he got back to his car, he noticed dust on his fingertips, the kind you'd find in places long forgotten. That night in his motel room, he dreamed of the house, but not as it was. He saw it submerged in dark water, drifting slowly toward the bottom. Its windows stared like eyes into blackness, and inside something moved between the floors, slow and steady as if swimming. He woke, gasping, drenched in sweat. The next day he returned. This time the house welcomed him. The front door was closed but unlocked. The sunlight didn't reach the foyer as easily. Shadows hung like drapes. He walked the rooms again, slower now, as if reacquainting himself. In the kitchen, he found a single plate on the counter, dustless, as though recently washed. In the basement, he found the wall, the one with the seam. He knelt, touched the mortar. It felt warm. That night, he didn't return to the motel. He stayed in the house. No bed, no lights, just a sleeping bag in the front room and a candle. He listened. The house whispered in its sleep. Voices not in English, not even in words, just tones, echoes, like humming in the bones. And through it all, he felt a sense of comfort, not peace exactly, but belonging. Like the place had made room for him, like it had been waiting. By the third night he stopped leaving. Neighbors began to notice lights at odd hours, flickering, coming from windows that had no lamps, shadows moving behind the curtains. One jogger said she heard piano music. Another said she saw someone standing on the roof, arms outstretched, not moving. The mail piled up. No one came or went. But the house pulsed, lived, and inside, Aaron sat at the kitchen table, carving small symbols into a piece of wood. His nails were blackened, his eyes sunken, but his hands moved with purpose, calm. And beneath the floorboards, something stirred, something old, something waking. Aaron no longer marked the passage of days. Time inside the house began to unspool thread by thread until it no longer resembled anything familiar. The sunlight through the windows lost its warmth, even at noon. The ticking of his watch slowed, lagged, then stopped altogether. At first he thought the battery had died, but when he placed it against his ear, he still heard the faint, inconsistent tick, like it was breathing. He spent most of his time in the basement now. The low ceiling, the crumbling mortar, the damp air, it should have felt claustrophobic. But instead, it felt safe, familiar. A place without judgment, without questions. The wall with the seam became his focus. He studied it for hours, ran his fingers across the surface until he knew each bump, each grain of brick. It no longer felt like a wall. It felt like skin. On the 7th day, though, it could have been the 10th, he found something new. As he pressed against a loose brick near the bottom corner, it shifted ever so slightly with a sound like wet paper tearing. Behind it was darkness. Not hollow space. Not another room. Just a black opening, deep and oddly still, like looking into the pupil of something alive. He didn't reach inside. Not yet. That night, the dreams returned sharper now. The house stood on a shoreline that stretched endlessly in both directions. The ocean was black, silent, without waves. Overhead, the sky rippled like fabric hanging low enough to touch. Shapes moved across it, tall, thin figures, with limbs too long and faces like ash. They walked the ceiling of the world and paused above the house, peering down with glowing eyes. Watching. Aaron woke at 3:15 a.m., the exact time. He always did. He didn't get up right away. The room was quiet, but not still. There was a sound in the walls like breathing, but with intention, as if something behind the plaster was listening for movement. His candle had burned low. A small wax pool flickered against the old wallpaper, casting shifting shadows. One of those shadows blinked. He didn't move. The blink came again, a slow, deliberate closing and opening of a lid where no lid should be. Then the whisper. It came from the vent behind him, soft and rustling like pages turning underwater. It didn't form words. It didn't need to. The message was clear: open the wall. By morning he obeyed. He returned to the basement with a chisel and small hammer. worked carefully, reverently. Each tap rang out dull and heavy like striking damp bone. The bricks loosened one by one, revealing that same impossible darkness, cool against his face like fog rolling up from a deep ravine. The air carried no scent, no draft. It simply was. He paused, leaned close. From within, a voice not aloud, not imagined, unfurled inside his mind. It was neither male nor female, young nor old. It existed outside language, yet filled his thoughts with images: a flooded stairwell, a locked door beneath a lake, a cradle swaying gently in a nursery with no child inside. Aaron wept, not in fear, in awe, in recognition. Something inside that wall knew him, had always known him, had watched him since birth and waited for him to return. And now he understood why he had come. That night he wrote a letter, a single sheet of paper left by the front door, addressed to no one. In it, he described the house as a throat of the earth, a place not haunted, but alive. He said it was a heart still beating, waiting for those who could hear it. He said it whispered not to scare, but to invite, that it offered truth for those willing to unlearn everything they believed about the world. Then he went downstairs and didn't return. The lights in the basement glowed for hours, flickered once, then went dark, and once again the house fell still. Weeks passed. The neighbors didn't ask questions. The mail carrier stopped delivering. The lawn grew wild. Someone posted a for sale sign. It disappeared within a day. The house did not want to be sold. It did not want to be left. One summer afternoon, a group of teenagers dared each other to sneak inside. The door was locked, but one window in the back hung loose. They slipped through with nervous laughter, and phones clutched tightly, cameras already rolling. Inside, the air was heavier than they expected. Stale, but warm. The kind of warmth that lingers in closets, too long closed. Dust floated in golden shafts through the windows. Every step echoed unnaturally loud. They walked through the first floor, mocking each other, pointing out where the ghosts might be. One girl paused by the fireplace and tilted her head. "Did you hear that?" she asked. The others fell silent, a soft creak above them. Footsteps, slow, measured. "Maybe someone's upstairs." One boy said, his voice forced into casualness. They stood in a circle listening. The air shifted, grew colder. Then 3 knocks, sharp, from beneath the floor. Not above, below. All laughter stopped. No one moved. The girl by the fireplace slowly turned toward the hallway. Her face paled. "There's someone in the mirror," she whispered. The others looked. There were only 4 of them, but the reflection showed 5. None of them spoke. The room shrank around them, each breath a little shorter, a little sharper. In the mirror's reflection, the 5th figure stood slightly apart from the others, tall, indistinct, as if composed of shifting smoke, not flesh. No features, no face, just presence. One of the boys, Jordan, stepped forward slowly, phone raised to capture the image. The screen remained black, even as he panned it across the group. No reflection, no recording. The lens refused to see what the eyes could not unsee. The 5th figure began to move, not in the mirror, on the floorboards behind them. Soft footfalls, thud, thud, thud. Jordan spun around, camera trembling in his hand, but there was nothing there. Only dust motes dancing in slow spirals beneath the chandelier. But the sound remained. Closer now. Inside the room. Another boy, Mikey, turned toward the staircase. "We should leave," he muttered, his throat dry. Seriously, this isn't funny anymore. But the house didn't like leaving. The front door they came through had disappeared. Where once there was wood and a brass knob, there now stood a blank wall. Plaster seamless. Wallpaper smooth, like the door had never existed. One girl let out a choked sound, a laugh swallowed by panic. "We came in through there. We did. I swear." No one responded. The floor shifted subtly underfoot, like something breathing just beneath the boards. Mikey grabbed the nearest doorknob and pulled. A hallway. Longer than it should have been. Wrong. Its walls narrowed as they extended, lined with doors too small to walk through. The light bulbs overhead flickered like candle flames underwater. Still, it felt better than staying. They entered the hall. The moment they stepped inside, the door behind them closed with a sound like soft thunder. They were alone now, alone together. The hallway bent to the left, then to the right like a coiled spine. The doors rattled as they passed, though no wind moved. The further they walked, the more distorted the air became. The wallpaper changed. At first floral, then thorns, then nothing, just an oily gray texture that pulsed when touched. Then came the sound, a low moan like wood flexing under weight, followed by the distant giggle of a child. "Don't look back," said the girl in front, Sarah. She didn't know why she said it. It wasn't a command. It was an instinct. They kept moving until they reached the end. The hallway opened into a room that shouldn't have existed. Circular. No windows. In the center stood a crib, old-fashioned. White-painted wood, chipped and stained. Inside was a bundle wrapped in yellowing linen. Jordan stepped forward, one hand outstretched. "Don't," Sarah whispered, but it was too late. He peeled back the cloth. Inside was not a baby. It was a doll. Porcelain. Eyes closed, lips blue, limbs jointed. But as Jordan touched it, the eyes snapped open, bright red, wide, and wet. The room exhaled. The wallpaper split. The floor began to warp, and the fifth figure returned. Now it was not in the mirror. Now it was real. It stepped through the wall like smoke pushing through cracks. Its form unstable, its edges flickering, but its eyes, if they could be called that, remained fixed on Jordan. The doll in his arms began to weep. Not scream, not cry. Weep, soft, slow, pitiful. Human. Jordan dropped it. It didn't hit the floor. It vanished before it landed like a flame blown out. The figure stepped closer. No one moved. They couldn't. Their limbs refused. Their breath caught in their lungs, not from fear, but from pressure, like standing at the bottom of deep water. Then, without a word, the figure raised one long hand and pointed behind them. They turned. The hallway was gone. In its place, a door. Familiar. Wooden. Carved with strange runes that pulsed like veins. They didn't ask questions. They ran, burst through it, back into the kitchen. The chandelier overhead swayed. The air was still thick, but lighter, as if whatever had watched them had grown bored, or satisfied, or simply gone. The window, still cracked from where they entered, was open now. They scrambled out, breathless. Grass beneath their feet never felt more alive. When they reached the sidewalk, they turned back once. Just once. The house stood quiet. No lights, no movement, as if nothing had happened. They never spoke of it again. Not to each other. Not to anyone. Their phones contained no footage. Their clothes bore no dust. Their memories blurred at the edges, fading quickly like dreams upon waking. But late at night, when the wind pressed against their windows and floorboards creaked without cause, each of them heard it. A single hollow knock. From beneath the bed, the house remained undisturbed for months. The grass reclaimed the front yard in slow curls. Vines stretched upward along the porch columns. Paint flaked in long, brittle strips. Ocean Avenue passed it by in silence. Neighbors learned to avert their gaze without realizing it, their eyes slipping past the house like water around a stone. At night, the windows glowed faintly, even without electricity, pale and soft as if lit from within by moonlight that didn't belong to the sky. A quiet understanding settled over the town. The house was not to be touched. Not anymore. And yet, as it often does, curiosity found its way through the cracks. This time it was a man named Charles Dean, a writer, middle-aged, tired in the way only writers get drained by too many words and too little meaning. He came to Amityville under the guise of research. His publisher had asked for a book on American hauntings. Something fresh. Something that leaned into folklore but felt literary. Dean had scoffed at the idea, then accepted the check. He arrived in the fall. The leaves were fire-colored and thick on the ground, crunching under his boots as he stood before 112 Ocean Avenue for the first time. The house looked smaller than he expected. Not monstrous, not cinematic, just old, wounded. It gave the impression of a thing that had seen too much and remembered it all. Dean didn't believe in ghosts, but he believed in atmosphere, in stories, and this place had that in spades. He found the key where the lawyer said it would be taped behind the gas meter. The lock turned easily, no resistance. The front door swung inward with a soft groan, revealing dust motes swirling in afternoon light. The air smelled faintly of paper copper, and something older, like a locked drawer finally opened after years. He unpacked in the kitchen, brought only what he needed. A sleeping bag, notebooks, a few canned meals, a thermos of coffee, and an old tape recorder. The rest he intended to gather from the house itself. Let it speak. Let it guide him. That night, he walked each room with slow, careful steps, recording as he moved. His voice echoed softly through the spaces. First floor. Empty. Walls untouched. Fireplace cold. No signs of previous occupants beyond mild dust accumulation. Proceeding to second floor. His voice steadied him, gave shape to the silence. When he reached the sewing room, the door was closed. He stood there for a moment, hand hovering over the knob. The recorder in his other hand hissed softly with background static. Then a click, barely audible. Not from the device, from inside the room. He opened the door. The room was bare. A small window let in moonlight, casting a cold silver square across the floorboards. No furniture, no fixtures. And yet the temperature inside was noticeably colder. Not a draft, something deeper. Like the chill that lingers in deep caves untouched by the sun. He stepped inside. The floor creaked once beneath his weight, then went silent. His voice, when he spoke again, sounded smaller. Room appears structurally sound. No visual anomalies. Temperature lower than adjacent hallway. Noted. He clicked the recorder off. That night, he dreamed of water. He stood waist-deep in a dark lake, the sky overhead a flat sheet of iron. Ripples spread from his legs in slow, deliberate patterns. Beneath the surface, something moved. Not fast, not hostile, just aware. Watching, he awoke to darkness, total darkness. The street lamp outside, which had cast its faint yellow glow through the window, was gone. So was the digital glow of his watch, the blinking light on his recorder, the moonlight from above. The house had swallowed all of it. He sat up, heart slow but heavy. The darkness wasn't empty. It was thick, humid, alive. And then softly he heard breathing, not his. It came from across the room, steady, measured. Inhale, pause, exhale. He reached for his flashlight. It didn't turn on. The breathing continued. Then, in the blackness, a whisper. "Why did you come?" His chest tightened. He couldn't locate the source. The voice was near, but not close, surrounding him without echo. He tried to speak, found his mouth dry. His own voice came out hoarse. "Who are you?" No reply, just another breath. Closer now. Then silence. A sudden gust of air, like something passing directly in front of him, raised goosebumps across his arms. And just as suddenly as it had vanished, the light returned street lamp moon stars. The world outside resumed its natural order, as if someone had flipped a switch. He sat there trembling, the room unchanged. The next morning he wrote nothing. His notes from the day before were intact, but his recorder's tape was blank white hiss from end to end. No voice, no steps, just static. Still he stayed. He told himself it was research. But in truth, it was something deeper. The house had acknowledged him. It had spoken. And now he needed to hear the rest. Charles spent the next 3 days in a trance-like rhythm, wake-wander record dream. He stopped calling his editor, stopped checking the calendar. The outside world thinned into abstraction. Only the house remained solid and dense like a great beast asleep beneath his feet. It didn't roar. It didn't rage. It simply watched. He began to notice patterns. The same spots where the floor groaned each night at 3:15. The subtle change in air pressure when he passed the sewing room. The way his coffee grew cold within minutes of setting it down. None of it was dramatic. Nothing that would draw headlines. But the constancy of it wore on him like water carving stone. On the 4th evening, he sat at the kitchen table with his tape recorder turned on and a candle burning low. His notebook lay open, though the page was mostly blank. He'd written a single phrase at the top in small, careful letters the house remembers. He didn't know why he'd written it. It had come to him suddenly like a voice just behind his ear. The flame flickered as he leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling. He whispered into the recorder. They always say it's haunted, that something terrible happened here. But what if it's more than that? What if the house didn't just witness horror, it absorbed it, kept it warm, fed it? He paused. The candle trembled. What if this house is a story that tells itself? Behind him, the floor creaked once, softly. He froze but didn't turn around. 3rd instance of unexplained movement, he said aloud, though his voice was thinner now, less certain. No draft, no visible cause. Then the recorder clicked off. He hadn't touched it. The red light winked out, and silence rushed in to fill the gap. The candle's flame rose tall, stretched unnaturally straight, as if pulled upward by invisible thread. The air thickened, and then the whisper returned. This time it spoke plainly. He stayed too long. Charles turned slowly. There was nothing behind him. No figure, no shadow. Only the kitchen door slightly ajar. It had been shut. He stood, walked to it, touched the edge with trembling fingers. The wood felt warm. On the other side, the hallway stretched dark and quiet. The sewing room door was open now. He didn't remember opening it. He walked to the threshold. Inside, the moonlight was gone. The window showed no sky, only a wall of black, complete and matte like velvet. And in the center of the room, something had changed. A small object sat neatly on the floor, a porcelain doll. Its head was tilted slightly to one side, its lips painted in a faint smile. Its hands rested in its lap, too still. Charles stared at it. He hadn't brought it in. He hadn't seen it before. He crouched slowly, candle in one hand, and leaned close. The eyes were shut. Painted lashes, delicate, lifeless. But the skin, it was too smooth, too warm. He reached out one hesitant finger, brushing its cheek. The eyes snapped open. Red, glassy, wet. The smile remained unchanged. Charles staggered back, the candle falling from his hand. Wax splattered the floor. The flame caught the edge of the old curtain, and for a moment there was fire. Real fire. But it didn't spread. It simply vanished, snuffed out. The curtain whole again. The wax gone. The doll still sitting there untouched. He backed out of the room, heart racing. Closed the door with a shaking hand and pressed his back against it. The hallway behind him was different now. Narrower. Closer. And then the lights went out. Not in bursts. Not with flickers. They simply ceased. Darkness swallowed the second floor whole. Charles didn't breathe. From the end of the hallway, just near the stairs, he heard it the sound of bare feet across old wood. Not heavy. Not rushed. Just steady, certain. One step. Another. Closer. He turned and opened the nearest door. A closet. Empty. He stepped inside and shut the door gently behind him. Held his breath. On the other side, the footsteps stopped. Silence returned. Then a knock. 1, 2, 3. Soft, patient. Then the doorknob turned, slowly, smoothly. The lock clicked, and Charles finally exhaled. The door didn't open. Not all the way. Just enough to let in a sliver of light from the hallway, a pale gray glow that shouldn't have existed since every bulb in the house had died. The crack widened no further. The knob stopped turning. Yet Charles remained frozen, his back pressed to the wall, the closet's wooden frame tight around him like a coffin. He didn't dare move. The hallway was silent again, but it wasn't empty. Something waited just beyond the door, not in a way that threatened, but in the way of a thing that simply was. He closed his eyes, listened. His breath sounded too loud. The house didn't breathe with him. It listened. The air didn't move. And then, with the gentleness of silk against skin, something slid across the floorboards, dragging, long and deliberate, a rhythm that suggested limbs, but not walking, closer, slower. A pause. Then nails, 5 of them, scraping once across the closet door in a single whispering arc. Not hard, just enough to let him know it knew where he was. He waited until morning. Somehow sleep came not as rest, but as retreat. When he woke, the door was fully open, and the hallway was filled with light. Real light. Morning sunlight, golden and thin through the windows. The sounds of the street below drifted in faintly, leaves rustling, a distant engine. The house pretended to be normal again. Charles emerged with slow steps, heart heavy in his chest, like a stone. Downstairs, his tape recorder lay on the table where he left it, still off. His notebook, however, had changed. Where before there had been one phrase. The house remembers there were now lines of text, dozens, written in his own hand, but in words he didn't recall writing. Phrases half familiar, like echoes from a dream. She watches through the walls. He never left the basement. There is no time here. The door is not locked. You opened it. Some lines were crossed out violently, others circled over and over. And at the very bottom, in fresh ink, one phrase stood alone. You are part of the house now. He stared at the page for a long time. No panic, no disbelief, just stillness. The truth of it sat quietly in his mind, unfolding itself like parchment soaked in oil. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He simply stood up, gathered his things, and left the notebook behind. He walked out the front door, locked it behind him, and drove away. That should have been the end, but it wasn't. The house followed him, not in shape, not in presence, but in sensation. Back in his apartment, the hallway light flickered at 3:15 every morning. His reflection in the bathroom mirror sometimes lagged by a fraction of a second. In dreams, he stood on the stairs of Ocean Avenue, and something waited at the top step, always just beyond his reach. One evening, he found a single page pinned to his bedroom door with a nail, torn from his notebook. The words written in bold strokes. She knows where you sleep. The house had been opened again, not physically, not in bricks or keys, but in attention, in observation. It had been seen, named, remembered, and it remembered in return. Charles began writing furiously, not about ghosts, not about hauntings, about structure, breath, hunger. He filled pages with diagrams of rooms that didn't exist and windows that opened to places with no light. His editor called asking for updates. He never answered. Neighbors saw him less and less. The shades stayed drawn, delivery boxes piled at his door, and then one night the power in the building went out. Only his apartment stayed lit. From the street, someone reported seeing him at his window, staring outward, eyes reflecting something that wasn't streetlights, something red. The next morning, he was gone. His apartment was empty. No sign of struggle. No sign of packing. Only a notebook left open on the desk, the same phrase written over and over again. filling every line. The house is not haunted. It is awake. After Charles disappeared, the manuscript he had been working on surfaced unexpectedly. It arrived at his publisher's office in a plain, unmarked envelope. No return address, no postage. Inside was a thick sheaf of typewritten pages bound with a rusted paperclip. The title on the first page was Simple Foundation. Beneath it, no author's name. Just the date, October 13th. The office assistant who opened it skimmed a few paragraphs, then brought it directly to the editor. He read through the entire thing in one sitting. By the end, his hands were trembling. He never spoke of what was written, only said the manuscript wasn't publishable, that it wasn't a book, it was a warning. He locked it away in a drawer and refused to discuss it again. A month later, he resigned without explanation. The drawer was found empty. Back in Amityville, the house remained dormant until someone else arrived. Her name was Elise Monroe, 28, photographer. She specialized in urban decay, forgotten buildings, silent spaces reclaimed by time. She'd read about the house in old forums and blog posts. The Lutz story intrigued her, but what really drew her in was the absence that followed. A place so infamous that it disappeared from the public eye. No social media photos, no updates, no trespassers bragging about their exploits, just a hole in the record. That silence, she believed, meant there was still something there worth seeing. She drove from Philadelphia with 2 cameras, a tripod, a backpack, and one rule: no staying overnight. She arrived late afternoon, the sun low and amber, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house didn't feel threatening at first glance. It looked tired, weathered, like a memory that had started to forget itself. The porch sagged slightly. The shutters hung unevenly, yet the windows gleamed clean and dark, reflecting the trees across the street in impossible detail. Elise circled the property with her phone, snapping pictures of angles, textures, framing ideas for the real shots she'd take once inside. The lock on the back door was already broken. She stepped through without hesitation. Inside, the air was dry and still. Her boots stirred dust that had settled in thick, uneven patches. She noticed right away how sound behaved differently, muted as though the house didn't like noise. Her camera clicked quietly, each shutter sounding too loud in the hush. She moved through the rooms, documenting decay. Cracked plaster, water-stained ceilings, a fireplace lined with soot that hadn't been touched in years. And then something strange. Every photo she took turned out perfect. Too perfect. No blur, no light distortion, no motion noise. Even in dim corners, the detail was sharp, the focus exact. It felt intentional, as though the house wanted to be seen. She entered the dining room, framed it, clicked. The chandelier above her twitched slightly. She froze, listening. Nothing. Wind, maybe. She stepped into the hallway, heading toward the stairs. She didn't plan to go upstairs, but her feet moved anyway. Each step creaked under her weight. She whispered under her breath, half to herself, half to the house. Just photos. Nothing else. I'll be gone before dark. The stairs led her to the second floor. The air changed. Cooler. Thicker. Her skin tingled. She moved quickly, snapping wide shots, corners, windows. Then she reached the sewing room. The door was open. She leaned in with her camera, framed the shot, clicked. The preview flashed for half a second, then turned black. She checked the camera battery, full lens clean. Took another. Same result. No image. Just void. She stepped inside. The smell hit her immediately, sweet and rotten, like flowers left in water too long. The room looked the same as every other, dusty, empty, faded. But it felt alive. Her pulse slowed. The house listened. Then she heard the whisper. Not loud, not urgent. It said her name, Elise. She spun camera clutched to her chest. No one, but the door was now closed. She reached for the knob. It turned easily, but the door didn't move. She pushed. Nothing. She hit it harder. Behind her, the floor creaked once. She turned again. In the center of the room sat a camera. Not hers. Old, metal body, leather strap. The kind from decades ago. It hadn't been there when she entered. She crouched, reached out, touched it. The shutter clicked on its own, and the house exhaled. Elise jerked her hand back as if burned. The camera before her buzzed faintly, a low vibration in the metal, like something barely holding still. She backed away, slowly, heart hammering. Her own camera strap was digging into her neck, but she didn't dare lower it. The room felt denser now, the walls closer. Light from the hallway had dimmed behind the door, though no sun had set. She reached out, tried the knob again. Still no give. Locked from the outside. She turned to the old camera on the floor. It had shifted positions, now facing her. The lens pointed directly at her chest. No sound, no movement. Just wrong. She spoke aloud, voice tight, almost whispering. I didn't mean to stay. The ceiling above her creaked. Something soft brushed the crown of her head, too high to be touched but low enough to feel. She crouched down and stared at the antique camera. Its lens blinked. Not a metaphor, not a feeling. It blinked once, an aperture reflex with organic timing, like an eye adjusting to darkness. Then the shutter clicked again, and Elise remembered nothing. She woke up on the ground floor, lying on the dusty carpet of the living room. The sun outside had vanished. Dusk pooled in every corner, like water rising from the baseboards. Her head ached. Her camera was gone. In her hand, however, was a single Polaroid. She didn't own a Polaroid. The image showed the sewing room empty. No furniture, no camera. But standing in the far corner, turned away from the lens, was a woman with dark hair in a black coat. Elise didn't remember anyone else entering the house. She stared at the photo for a long time, her fingers trembling. Then she noticed something. In the reflection of the window behind the woman, there was a face, her own, eyes wide, mouth open, as if screaming. She bolted upright, staggered toward the back door. This time, it opened easily. The air outside hit her like a wave, fresh, cool, alive. She ran to her car, barely registering the gravel beneath her boots. The house stood behind her, quiet as ever, the porch light flickering on, even though no one had wired it in years. She drove until the GPS lost the signal, then kept driving. She didn't stop until she was home, back in her apartment. She went straight to her backup drive. Dumped every image she had taken that day onto the screen, but they were all blank, every file. Empty white squares, each time stamped correctly, each file size intact, but no images, except for one. A new folder had appeared on the drive unmarked. Inside it was a single photograph, the same one she held in her hand. The sewing room. The woman. Herself. She tried deleting it. It wouldn't go away. She unplugged the drive, restarted the computer, reformatted the storage. The image came back. Then her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No text. Just the same image. No caption. No context. That night the lights in her apartment flickered. Not random. Rhythmic. 3 long blinks. 2 short. Then silence. At exactly 3:15 a.m., her camera powered on by itself. She had removed the battery hours before. The lens turned slowly, scanning the room until it pointed directly at her bed, and clicked. Elise didn't sleep. She lay rigid beneath the covers, the air around her thick and unmoving. The click of the shutter echoed in her chest long after the sound had died. She watched the camera, her own, resting on the desk across the room. It didn't move again. Its lens remained fixed on her like an open eye refusing to blink. She wanted to believe it had all been a malfunction, a glitch. But deep down, Something colder whispered the truth the house had followed her home. She spent the next day tearing her apartment apart. She dismantled the camera piece by piece, laid the components on the floor like bones. She erased every drive, every file, every backup. She threw the Polaroid into the trash. It was back on her desk an hour later, pristine and untouched, the corners slightly curled as if it had always been there. No matter how many times she disposed of it, it returned. On her nightstand, in her coat pocket. Once folded neatly between the pages of a book she hadn't opened in years. At night things shifted. The lights dimmed earlier. The windows fogged without condensation. The sound of the hallway beyond her apartment door changed from city traffic and muffled neighbors to quiet padded footsteps on hardwood. She installed cameras. They recorded nothing, just silence. But sometimes between frames, the hallway grew longer. On the fourth night, Elise dreamed of the sewing room again. This time she stood inside it, but the walls were flesh, not metaphor, not exaggeration. They pulsed gently like lungs. The window at the far end was gone. In its place, a mirror. She walked toward it, and her reflection didn't move. It stood still as she approached, eyes fixed forward. Its mouth opened before hers did. "Elise," it said, "we're almost ready." She woke, gasping, drenched in sweat, her sheets tangled. The mirror above her dresser was fogged from the inside. When she wiped it clear, there were finger marks on the glass. From the other side, she called a friend, told them nothing truthful, just that she needed to get out, needed to go somewhere with people. They offered their guest room. She packed quickly, avoiding her reflection, ignoring the camera lens she felt in the walls. That night she drove. She didn't stop at red lights, barely checked her mirrors. The city fell away behind her like ash. She reached her friend's house just past midnight. They welcomed her in with sleepy hugs, gentle confusion. She told them she'd explain in the morning. She just needed to sleep. The guest room was quiet, warm, normal. The bed soft, the blankets unfamiliar but comforting. She fell asleep almost instantly. At 3:15 a.m., the power in the house went out. In her dreams, she walked a hallway that never ended. Doors on either side. Behind one, a camera clicked over and over. Behind another, something whispered her name with 100 different mouths. Behind a third, the sewing room lit by a single bare bulb swinging without breeze. She woke to find herself standing in the kitchen, barefoot, the floor beneath her slick with something thick and dark. Her friend stood in the doorway, pale as chalk. "Elise," they said, voice hollow, "you're bleeding." She looked down. Her hands were covered in ink. No cuts, no wounds, just ink, thick black and dripping. Then the sound returned, a camera shutter. But this time, it came from inside her head. Elise didn't speak. Couldn't. The sound of the shutter pulsed like a heartbeat inside her skull, steady, mechanical, impossible to silence. Her friend stepped forward, reaching hesitantly toward her, but Elise stepped back without thinking. The ink on her hands was warm. It smelled faintly of dust and rot, like pages soaked in stagnant water. She backed into the counter, heart-racing breath shallow. The lights flickered once, then again, and then stayed off. The kitchen plunged into darkness thick enough to feel, the kind that clings to your skin. Her friend's voice trembled. "What's happening?" Elise shook her head slowly. "It followed me." In the silence that followed, they both heard it. A soft knock from the hallway, 3 taps, then the creak of the floor. Neither moved. The sound came again closer. The house was breathing. Not this house. The house. Somehow impossibly it was here too. Its walls, its heartbeat, its eyes folded into the dimensions of wherever Elise happened to be. She ran. Through the front door. Into the night. Her friend called after her, confused, scared, barefoot on the porch. Elise didn't stop. She didn't even know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay still. Not anymore. She drove until the sky turned gray, until the roads were unfamiliar, until the shutter stopped echoing. She found a motel off a nameless exit, paid in cash, refused the TV, ignored the phone. Inside the room, she locked the door, pulled the curtains shut, and turned every light on. Then, with trembling hands, she opened her camera bag. It was empty. No lenses, no body, no memory cards, only the Polaroid. The same image, the woman in the room, Elise in the window. But now something was different. In the photo, the figure in the corner had turned slightly toward the camera. Her face still obscured, but her shoulder angled forward, her posture shifting. It had moved. Elise tore it in half, burned the pieces in the bathroom sink. That night she heard scratching on the motel wall. Not mice, not wind. The slow, deliberate scrape of nails on plaster. Behind her head, just above the headboard. At 3:15 a.m., the lights flickered out again. The mirror above the sink in the motel bathroom fogged over. She didn't touch it. She packed her things in silence before sunrise and left without checking out. In the days that followed, Elise became a ghost in her own life. She stopped posting, stopped answering calls. She moved from motel to motel, never staying more than a night. But wherever she went, the photo returned, folded inside a sock, pressed between the pages of her journal, once taped to the inside of her windshield. Always the same image, but each time the figure turned a little more. The last version showed the woman facing the camera. No features, no face, just a smooth porcelain mask and two red eyes looking straight at her. Elise knew she couldn't keep running. Not from the house, not from the image, not from whatever had tethered itself to her the moment she stepped into that sewing room. It wasn't just following her, it had claimed her, marked her. And now the line between where the house ended and where she began was fading. She felt it in her bones when she woke up, in the way her breath fogged glass from the inside, in the way mirrors now showed her a moment behind herself, as if time inside her reflection moved at a different rhythm. She didn't recognize her own eyes anymore. They weren't red, but they looked older. The Polaroids kept coming. She stopped trying to destroy them. Fire didn't touch them. Water didn't smudge them. Even when shredded, they returned whole pristine always in her presence when the clock read 3:15. One night, she didn't move. She waited, watched the second hand tick toward the moment, and right on cue a soft knock at the motel door. 3 times, not frantic, not demanding, just patient. She stood, crossed the room slowly, didn't open it. Instead, she turned toward the bathroom. The mirror was already fogged. This time there was no message, no handprint, no breath, just the fog. She leaned close, wiped it slowly. In her reflection she stood alone, but behind her in the shower the curtain bulged outward slightly. Still, rounded, like someone standing just out of sight. She turned fast, nothing. Pulled the curtain open, empty, but the mirror had changed again. Now the woman was there in the reflection only. Porcelain mask, black coat, red eyes. This time Elise moved first. She ran to the bed, ripped her duffel open, found the only thing she hadn't yet used, a notebook. She opened it to the middle and wrote in quick, frantic lines descriptions, dates, symbols she'd seen carved into the doorways of the house. The circle etched into the sewing room floor. The 3 vertical lines that appeared behind the mirror glass wherever she stayed. She filled page after page. Her hand cramped. The ink smudged under sweat. Then she paused, because her hand was still writing. She wasn't moving it, but the pen dragged on. A line curved across the page, a spiral, tight, deepening. Then it stopped, and beneath it, in perfect handwriting, not her own, were 4 words. Come back to us. Elise dropped the pen. The room fell silent. She turned on every light, sat in the center of the floor knees to chest back to the wall. The air grew colder with each passing minute, and at 3:15 a.m. the next night the motel ceiling cracked. Not from age, not from weight, from pressure. A slow, wide fracture spreading above her head. Through it, dust began to fall, and with it something darker, small black flakes that drifted like ash but never settled. The air was filled with their scent roses, long dead ink left open too long, breath trapped behind plaster. Elise didn't move. She knew what it was. The house had found her again, but this time it wasn't sending images. It was sending pieces. The flakes drifted down in spirals, slow and silent, landing on her shoulders, her hands, her face. They melted into her skin, not wet, not solid, just gone the moment they touched, as if absorbed. Elise didn't flinch. She sat motionless beneath the cracking ceiling, feeling the weight of the house settle over her like a blanket. The walls of the motel were breathing now, not creaking, not shifting, breathing, expanding and contracting in a slow, tidal rhythm as if the room had lungs. Her phone vibrated once on the bedside table. She didn't move to check it, but the screen lit up. One notification, no caller ID. A message preview. We're open again. Then a shutter sound. Her phone's camera had taken a photo by itself. She grabbed it slowly, heart thudding, and opened the image. It was her seated on the floor, the cracked ceiling above her, the flakes mid-fall. But in the background, reflected in the black screen of the TV, stood the masked woman. Closer than before, not in the distance, not out of focus. Standing just behind Elise, her hand reaching down toward Elise's shoulder. But Elise hadn't felt a thing. She dropped the phone. The TV powered on. Static hissed softly, but instead of white noise, the screen displayed a still frame. The sewing room. Moonlight slanted through the window. The antique camera sat in the middle of the floor. The doll, the mask, the spiral drawn in chalk. And something else now, a chair facing the lens. Empty, waiting. She knew it was for her. She turned off the TV, unplugged it, covered it with the motel towel. It didn't matter. The image remained beneath her eyelids when she blinked. When she breathed, she packed again, left before dawn. She didn't check out, didn't tell the staff. By now, Elise understood something deep, undeniable, wordless. She couldn't escape the house, because the house was no longer a place. It was a presence, a thought that had become form. And once seen, once felt, it didn't fade. It grew. She drove without a map, her route unplanned, her destination unspoken. But she knew where she was going. The GPS on her phone had reset itself. No signal, no map, just a single word on the screen in pale gray letters. Home, and a blinking red dot over Long Island. The closer she got, the more familiar the roads felt, even though she didn't remember taking them before. Trees bowed overhead in silence. Houses blurred into shadows. By the time she pulled onto Ocean Avenue, the sky had darkened, not with nightfall, with something heavier. The street lamps were out. Her headlights dimmed, and there it was, 112 Ocean Avenue, still, waiting. The porch light flickered once as she parked. She stepped out without locking the car. Each step up the walkway felt like a heartbeat. The front door opened for her before she reached it. Inside, the house exhaled. Not loud, not dramatic, just a breath. Familiar. Elise crossed the threshold, and the door closed softly behind her. The silence inside was total. Not absence of sound, but the presence of listening. Elise stood just beyond the door, her shadow stretching long across the entryway floor, though no light source cast it. Dust floated in thick beams from the high windows, but the air smelled cleaner than before, like the house had been aired out, prepared. She moved forward, slowly drawn, not by fear, but by inevitability. Every step she took, echoed softly, muffled by the dense atmosphere pressing against her skin. The wallpaper had changed. Subtle differences, patterns she didn't remember, spirals, rows of vertical slashes, the faint image of an open eye buried in the curls. She passed the living room, the cold fireplace, the narrow stairwell leading upward like a throat, up, and she climbed, not rushed, not hesitant. The steps knew her feet. They didn't creak now. They welcomed her. At the top, the hallway stretched long impossibly so the walls slightly bowed inward, like the house had been pulled tight around its center. Doors lined the sides, all closed except one. The sewing room. Its door was open, of course. Light spilled out, not electric, not moonlight. Just light. Pale and warm, almost golden, like early morning sun through fog. She stepped in. The room was clean. No dust. No rot. The floorboards polished. The walls painted. In the center sat the old chair turned to face the antique camera. The tripod stood exactly where it always had. The doll was gone. The mirror was gone. There was only the chair and the camera and the soft humming sound that filled the room like a lullaby being sung underwater. Elise walked forward and sat. The seat fit her perfectly. The moment she did, the camera clicked. No flash, no movement, but she felt it. Like a weight lifted. Or placed. She wasn't sure which. Then slowly the room began to change. The light dimmed. Shadows moved, not with the sun, but with intention. The walls creaked in rhythm with her breath. The spirals on the wallpaper deepened, sank into the plaster. The lens of the camera widened slightly, adjusting. And across from her, something stepped from the far corner. The woman in the black coat, porcelain mask, red eyes, silent. She didn't walk. She emerged like smoke, thickening into shape. She stood in front of the camera, facing Elise, then stepped aside slowly, inviting, welcoming. Elise stood and moved behind the camera. She understood now. It had always been her, the photographer, the subject, the witness. She looked through the viewfinder. The chair was empty, but the room was full. Figures stood along the walls, half-seen forms, silhouettes, eyes glowing softly in the dark. All watching, all still. And in the center, a new figure sat in the chair. Her, but not her, older, still, staring back through the lens. The shutter clicked, and everything went black. When the house opened again 3 days later, the inside was unchanged. No dust, no smell, just a single photograph lying on the sewing room floor. Elise seated in the chair, smiling faintly. Behind her in the reflection of the camera lens, the room was filled with eyes. The photo remained where it was for weeks. No one entered to find it. No one passed by to notice the soft light that flickered in the sewing room window at night, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. The house had returned to stillness, but it was not dormant. It was watching, absorbing, waiting, and the photograph sat like an offering. Elise frozen in that faint smile surrounded by shadows. Her eyes followed you no matter where you stood in the room. Her face calm content, as if she'd found what she had been looking for all along. When the house opened again, it was quiet. This time it was a boy. 17. His name was Nolan Harker. He came not for thrills, not for stories, but for silence. His brother had died the month before. Suicide. Unexpected. Unanswered. Nolan had grown numb. Nothing at home made sense anymore. His world had dimmed. He didn't believe in ghosts. He just didn't believe in anything else either. So when he heard about the house, saw it whispered about in forums, old message boards archived in forgotten corners of the web, he thought maybe it would be a place to feel something again. Even fear would be better than this gray emptiness. He climbed through the window at dusk. No lock, no sound. The house welcomed him like it had done with all the others. He walked through the front hall flashlight, cutting a narrow beam across aged walls. The air was cool, but not stale. It smelled faintly of old photographs, of memories pressed into plastic sleeves. Upstairs, the corridor waited. He found the sewing room without looking for it. The door stood open, the soft light inside already glowing. When he entered, he froze. The camera stood where it always had. The chair, the hush, and the photograph placed neatly at the edge of the window facing outward. He picked it up, looked closely. Eliza. He didn't know her, but something about her face pulled at him. Behind her, the reflection. Eyes. He felt the weight of the room shift. A sound behind him. He turned. The chair was no longer empty, and neither was the house. Nolan's breath caught in his throat. The chair that had been empty seconds before now cradled a figure, motionless, facing the camera. It wasn't Elise. It wasn't anyone he recognized. The figure was blurred at the edges, like it couldn't decide what form to take. Its head was bowed. Its hands rested gently on its knees. But the longer he stared, the more certain he became that it was watching him. Not with eyes, there were none he could see, but with focus, with attention. A weight pressed against his chest, not crushing but intimate, like the moment before someone whispers a secret directly into your ear. The photograph in his hand felt warm. He looked down. The image had changed. Elise was still there, but now she looked to the side. Her eyes no longer faced the camera, they faced him. He dropped the photo. It didn't fall. It stayed in midair for a moment, hovering between his fingers and the floor, before slowly turning over, revealing its blank back. The light in the room dimmed the walls, closing in just slightly. He stepped backward. The camera clicked on its own. The figure in the chair looked up. Still no face, just presence. Then the door slammed shut. The sound was so sudden, so solid, it left his ears ringing. He turned, ran to it, yanked the handle. It didn't move. Behind him, the figure stood. Its limbs stretched unnaturally long in the candlelight, its movements smooth, deliberate. He didn't scream. He couldn't. The air was too thick now, like he was breathing syrup. The shadows along the walls began to ripple. They weren't cast by the light. They were cast by others, dozens of them, pressed against the walls as if watching from behind a thin veil. They shifted slightly, like wind through tall grass. A chorus of eyes, not glowing, just aware. Nolan pressed himself against the wall, heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. The figure stepped toward him, slow, elegant, like someone walking through deep water. And then it stopped, raised a hand, extended one long finger, and pointed to the camera. Nolan shook his head. The room grew colder. The hand remained steady. The shadows along the walls began to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. He stepped toward the camera. His body moved without full consent, like something inside him had already agreed. He knelt behind the lens, placed his eye to the viewfinder, looked, and saw himself in the chair, older, empty-eyed, smiling softly. He tried to move, couldn't. The shutter clicked. The room went dark. When the sun rose the next morning, the sewing room was empty again, but a new photo sat in the window. Nolan perfectly framed. Behind him Elise, and behind them both the blurred figure, closer than before. The photo didn't stay alone for long. That morning, as mist crawled low over Ocean Avenue, a passing mail carrier caught sight of the window. Just a flicker light bouncing strangely off the glass, a pale square pressed behind it. He paused on the sidewalk, squinting. Something about the image tugged at him, irrational and subtle. He took one step toward the gate, then another. But before his hand could reach the latch, the porch light blinked on. A single flash. He stopped, blinked, rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, the window was empty. Just curtain, just shadow. He turned and walked quickly down the street. Said nothing. But that night he dreamed of the photograph. Not the one he saw, but another. An empty chair. And the sound of something breathing softly behind him. Inside the house, the photograph of Nolan faded. Not vanished, faded. As if the paper itself forgot what it was supposed to remember. The edges curled, the ink ran like water, and by midnight, the image was little more than fog. But something had changed. The sewing room wasn't still anymore. The walls had begun to pulse faintly. the floorboards softening at the edges, like they were less wood and more skin. The spiral on the floor reappeared, not drawn in chalk, but etched beneath the grain, as if it had always been there waiting, under layers of polish and dust. The camera clicked once at 3:15 a.m. with no one to trigger it. And when the film developed, the chair was empty, but the shadows were gone. The room had been cleared, prepared. The house was resetting. Elsewhere, Elise stood on a beach at dawn, barefoot coat whipping in the wind. She didn't remember how she'd gotten there, didn't remember the drive or the sunrise or her name. She only knew the ocean was behind her, and something far older was ahead. The sand beneath her toes felt like paper. Every wave sounded like a shutter click, and when she turned around, she saw a row of people standing at the waterline, silent, still faces, pale as fog. She recognized one, Nolan, his eyes empty, his mouth slightly open as if in mid-thought. She stepped toward them, then stopped, because behind them, behind all of them, stood the woman in the mask. The porcelain face, the black coat, red eyes that burned without heat, and in her hand she held a camera, facing forward, toward Elise. The lens clicked once, and the sea went quiet. Elise didn't flinch when the shutter clicked. The sound didn't echo, not across the beach, not through the wind. It sank. Into the sand, into her bones, into the space behind her eyes. The masked woman lowered the camera slowly. The figures at the shoreline remained still. Dozens of them now. More than she remembered. Their feet submerged in water that didn't move. Their faces all facing her. Not accusing, not pleading. Just waiting. She took a step forward. The sand felt warmer than it should have been. Soft like flesh beneath the grains. She felt something pulse under her heel. She paused, looked down. The spiral was there, etched into the wet sand, half buried, rotating outward with impossible precision. It didn't end. It only curved. Always. She stepped back. It moved with her. Not physically, but in her vision, like it was somehow fixed behind her eyes. The masked woman stepped forward now. She walked along the shoreline without disturbing it. No prints, no shadows. The folds of her coat moved like smoke underwater. In one hand, she held the camera. In the other, something Elise couldn't quite see. A shape, a color, a weight that her mind refused to resolve. And when she finally stood before Elise, mere feet apart, the sea behind her flat and endless, the woman tilted her head. The mask did not move, but the eyes behind it pulsed once. Elise raised her hand slowly, not to defend, not to run, just reaching, compelled. The woman extended her own, pressed the object into Elise's palm. It was cold, familiar, a photograph. Her, not as she stood now but seated, in the sewing room, the camera before her, her hands resting calmly on her knees. Her eyes closed, not dead, just waiting. Elise looked up, but the woman in the mask was gone. The beach was empty. No figures, no ocean, no wind, just silence. She looked down at the photo again. Now the figure in the chair had opened its eyes, red, smiling. Not Elise. Her. The one from the mirror. The one from the dream. The one the house had kept. Elise's fingers loosened. The photo fluttered from her hand and disappeared before it hit the ground. She stood alone beneath a pale, sunless sky, and from the horizon where the sea once lay, a door began to rise, wooden, weathered, white, with black shutters, and a porch that waited. The door stood upright, where the horizon had been framed by nothing. No sky, no sea, no land, just the vast blank of unplace. Elise stared at it, her breath slow, her thoughts muffled, as if wrapped in cloth. The door was familiar, impossibly so. White paint peeling in thin vertical lines, the brass knob dulled by time. She didn't need to move toward it. With each blink, it was closer. With each breath, it grew taller. More defined, the shutters snapping shut above it, like blinking eyes. Then it opened. No sound, no creak. Just a widening crack of shadow-cool air spilling out like breath from deep underground. Elise didn't resist. Her body moved forward on instinct, as though this path had already been walked, already been chosen. Inside was darkness, but not empty. She felt walls, a floor, the faint shape of the house wrapping around her again. The scent returned, roses long dead, waterlogged wood, and something else beneath it. Old ink, old memory. A hallway stretched ahead, narrow and soft at the edges, like a dream remembered wrong. The photographs began here, framed on the walls. Dozens, hundreds. She stopped to look at the first. It was Nolan standing in the sewing room, smiling faintly. Behind him, Elise's expression unreadable. Further back, the masked woman blurry but unmistakable. The next frame showed Charles Dean, the writer, seated in the kitchen with papers spread before him. A photo of the same photo hung behind him. A copy of a memory. She walked slowly. Each photograph told a part of the story, never complete, never ordered but connected. In one, she saw her motel room door slightly ajar, something long-fingered, reaching from the darkness. In another, her childhood bedroom, untouched for years now, with the spiral etched into the ceiling. Then she saw herself again, alone in the chair, then again standing behind the camera, then again reaching through the mirror. Each frame became more distorted. Faces began to blur. Walls curved inward. Doors appeared within windows. Some photos had no people, just shadows with eyes red and burning. At the end of the hallway, one last frame, empty, a black square. Elise stared into it, and the black stared back. It pulsed, once, twice, then peeled open like a curtain, and revealed a second hallway behind the wall. This one older, colder. She stepped through the photo, into the hall behind the wall. The floor here was soft. The wallpaper was skin. The air buzzed with the sound of unseen shutters. And ahead of her, the camera stood waiting, tripod, extended lens, focused, already watching. The chair behind it was filled by her, the real her, eyes closed, head tilted slightly, breathing. She walked in a circle, slowly trying to understand. And then the seated version of herself opened her eyes, spoke with her voice. "Did you finally come back?" The camera clicked, and everything went dim. The dimness wasn't absence, it was presence. A quiet so deep it pressed against Elise's skin like velvet soaked in shadow. The air held still heavy with recognition. Across from her, the seated version of herself didn't blink. Her eyes remained open, clear red-rimmed. Not glowing, just awake. Her expression was peaceful, but not passive. Intent. As though she had waited a long, long time for this moment to arrive. Elise didn't move. She couldn't. Her limbs felt submerged in the space between dreaming and drowning. The camera before them adjusted slightly, its lens whirring faintly, tightening its focus. The shutter clicked again. A slow sound stretched out like breath escaping through narrow lips. Her reflection spoke again, voice quiet but heavy with memory. "You've seen what we are. You've seen what we keep." Elise's throat felt tight. "Who are you?" "We're the part that remembers," the reflection answered. "The part that watches. You stepped through the frame, Elise. You followed the thread, and now you are." The hallway around them curved inward, folding like fabric soaked in gravity. The photographs on the walls began to peel and shift. Images flickered, changing, rearranging. Nolan sitting in the chair. Elise standing behind the camera. The woman in the mask emerging from mirrors, then vanishing again. Faces distorted. Frames pulsing. Her double stood now, identical in every detail except for the eyes. The red was deeper now. Not a glow. A gravity. "You can leave," she said. Elise blinked. "You can walk back out the door. Return to motels, to silence. Pretend you outran the house." The words settled in Elise's chest like iron. "Or," the reflection tilted her head, "or you stay. You remember, and you keep." Behind the camera, the shadows thickened. The tripod melted into roots. The walls curved into ribs. The floor groaned beneath unseen weight. Elise's heart pounded, but not with fear, with understanding. The house wasn't haunted. The house was a mouth, and the camera was its eye. She stepped forward, touched the cold metal casing, felt her fingertips sink slightly into the surface like skin. The shutter clicked once more, not by machine, but by will, and then the figure before her, her other self, stepped back, dissolving into smoke that folded neatly into Elise's chest. No resistance, no pain, just merging. She gasped, and when she opened her eyes again, she was sitting in the chair. The camera stared at her. The hallway was gone. The world narrowed, and from behind the lens 100 pairs of eyes blinked open, watching, waiting, knowing. The next photo developed itself, curling gently in the air. Elise in the chair, red eyes wide, hands clasped, a faint smile on her lips, and in the reflection of the lens, someone new was arriving. The photograph drifted to the floor, like a feather landing silently beside the others, already scattered in a spiral. Elise did not move. She sat in the chair posture, calm breath, steady as though she had been there for years or hours or always. The camera before her no longer needed film. It no longer needed light. It captured without taking, recorded without sound. Its eye opened only for one purpose: to keep. And Elise understood now. This wasn't a haunting. This was memory architecture. A structure built not from wood and nail, but from recollection, attention, witness. A house shaped by the accumulation of eyes. From behind the camera, the hallway unfolded again. Not built, revealed. Another figure stepped in. A girl, no older than 10, holding a flashlight. Sneakers leaving wet footprints on the wood. Her name was Audrey. She had wandered away from her cousin's house 2 blocks over. Drawn by the porch light, she swore she saw blinking from the upstairs window. She didn't know this place, but it knew her. Elise watched from her chair, silent. The camera never moved. It didn't need to. Audrey paused at the doorway, frowning. She had expected the front door to be locked, but it wasn't. The knob turned cold beneath her small hand. Inside, the house was still. She whispered, "Hello." The word didn't echo. She stepped in, flashlight beam cutting through dust that didn't swirl, just hung suspended like memory. She explored cautiously. The living room, the narrow kitchen, up the stairs where the carpet grew darker with each step. Elise watched from within. Not present, not absent, a witness now. When Audrey reached the sewing room, she paused. The flashlight dimmed slightly. The door was open. The camera stood. The chair was empty. The spiral on the floor pulsed softly, a heartbeat without body. Audrey's feet crossed the threshold. She stared at the chair, then at the lens. "Is someone taking pictures?" she whispered. The shutter clicked. She flinched, looked behind her. No one. And yet the air told her she was not alone. The camera clicked again, this time slower. Drawn out, curious. She turned to leave, but the door had closed. No sound, just gone. She began to cry. Softly, not loud. Elise felt it. The pull. The weight of memory forming. Her hands, still clasped in her lap, twitched. She could feel Audrey's breath in the room, smell her fear, hear her confusion, and yet she could not move. Not yet. That wasn't her role anymore. The girl backed toward the wall. The spiral glowed faintly beneath her feet, and the lens began to open wider, like an eye preparing to swallow. Audrey's breath quickened. Her small hands trembled around the dimming flashlight, its beam flickering across the walls like a heartbeat out of rhythm. She stepped backward until her spine pressed against the wall as though the wood might protect her, but the house did not offer protection. It offered perspective, witness, absorption. She didn't understand that yet. All she knew was that something in the room was seeing her, not watching, seeing, completely, deeply, as if her thoughts, her memories, her childhood fears were laid bare under a microscope of attention too ancient to explain. The camera shifted, not physically, but in presence. Its lens opened wider. The air thinned. Elise, still in the chair, felt the pull from behind the lens like a current. She wasn't in control of it, but she was part of it now. The house didn't act. It responded to emotion, to memory, to entry. Audrey had stepped into the spiral, and the house had already begun to remember her. The flashlight died. Audrey whimpered once, then silence. The only light in the room now was ambient and unnatural, glowing softly from no source, like the space itself had begun to illuminate in breathless anticipation. The spiral beneath Audrey's feet shifted. Its edges moved. Subtly, patiently, it turned inward, guiding her gaze toward the chair. She looked and saw Elise, not as she truly was, but as the house remembered her, red-eyed, still, smiling softly with a sadness too old for words. "Who are you?" Audrey whispered. Her voice barely reached past her lips, but Elise heard it in full, inside her mind, inside the house, and she wanted to answer. More than anything, she wanted to reach forward and tell the girl to leave, to run, but she couldn't, because part of her agreed. Part of her knew that Audrey had been called, and part of her understood that this was the only way the house could stay awake through the eyes of others. Audrey stepped forward, one pace, then another. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She simply stared at the chair. The camera clicked again, and in that sound, something passed between them. Elise felt it. So did Audrey. The air shimmered for a moment like heat off pavement. Then Audrey blinked. The room was empty. The chair, the spiral, gone. Only the camera remained silent. Still, the lens turned toward the open door. Audrey walked out dazed, as if stepping from a dream she wouldn't remember clearly. She made her way down the stairs, past the dust that didn't move through the hall, that no longer breathed. She stepped out onto the porch just as dawn broke. She turned once, looked back at the house, but saw nothing unusual. Just windows, just silence. She would forget most of it by afternoon. But that night, as she lay in bed, she found a photograph tucked under her pillow. A girl in a chair, eyes open, staring into the lens. Elise, and written faintly along the bottom, barely visible in the faded light. "You saw us, so now you are part of it." Audrey didn't tell anyone about the photo. She didn't have the words. Every time she tried to speak of the house, her thoughts turned to fog. She could describe the porch, the old smell, maybe even the feel of the dusty air, but not the camera, not the spiral, and definitely not Elise. Her parents found her quietness strange. She had always been chatty, full of questions. But now she moved slower, stared longer at corners of rooms, and she started drawing spirals in the margins of her school notebooks without realizing it. Small at first, then wider, deeper. At night, she tucked the photo under her mattress. It always returned to the pillow, every morning. Like a ritual, the house insisted on continuing. In the picture, Elise never changed expression, but the background did. At first, the room behind her was empty. Then a mirror appeared. Then the faint outline of another figure standing behind her, half in shadow. By the end of the week, that shadow was clearer. A woman. The mask. The eyes. Audrey began waking up at 3:15 a.m. without fail. No alarm. Just silence, followed by a sound she couldn't place, like a shudder, but deeper, more final. She'd lie there in the dark, staring at her closet door, knowing it hadn't been open when she went to sleep. Knowing it would be open again by morning. She told herself it wasn't real, that nothing followed her out of that house. But then came the whispering, at first indistinct, just rustling. Then words, "We see you," always in a voice that sounded almost like her own, only older. She stopped sleeping. Her parents grew worried, took her to a counselor. Audrey sat on the leather couch, fingers clasped, and didn't speak. But she drew, spiral after spiral on the clipboard paper, each stroke slower, more deliberate. The counselor kept one of the drawings, pinned it to her office board, curious. That night she dreamed of a chair in an empty room and a girl standing beside a camera, her eyes the color of old photographs soaked in red light. Audrey stayed home from school the next day. The photo was now on her bedroom wall. She hadn't put it there. It was larger, framed, and in it, Elise was no longer alone in the chair. Audrey stood beside her holding the antique camera. Her smile was faint, but it was there. Audrey didn't ask how the photograph had grown. She didn't touch it. But every night, she stared at it from her bed, its frame glowing faintly in the dark, like a memory that refused to stay buried. In the image, Elise's eyes seemed more alive, more alert, as though she was waking from within the photograph itself. Audrey's own likeness standing beside the chair, fingers gently wrapped around the camera, was too accurate. Not a smile posed for a lens, but a real moment, a real presence, captured, preserved. And she had no memory of it being taken. Her parents eventually removed the photo, tried to. It wouldn't leave the wall. Tape, nails, adhesive, nothing worked. When they forced it into a trash bag and took it outside, they returned to find the same image this time, printed directly on her bedroom mirror, like it had burned itself into the glass. That night, Audrey whispered into the dark, "What do you want?" And the answer came not aloud, not in thought, but through the house, not the one on Ocean Avenue, the one inside her, the one that had followed her home. It said to keep. The word throbbed behind her ribs. She covered the mirror, tried to ignore the creaking floorboards at 3:15, tried to silence the whispering that now echoed faintly from the corners of her room, repeating fragments of her own memories back to her like old recordings. "I didn't mean to go in," she heard one night. Her voice, but younger. "I just wanted to see what was inside." The next day at school, she didn't speak. When the teacher called her name, she turned slowly, eyes distant, and replied with a sentence that didn't belong to her. She said the camera only blinks when it sees truth. No one understood, but her teacher never forgot the way she said it. That evening, Audrey found another photo tucked inside her math book. A new one. The sewing room again. This time, a third figure stood in the reflection, barely visible at the edge of the glass behind Elise and Audrey. A boy, seated in the corner, eyes open, mouth closed, waiting. The shadows had begun returning. The wall around the photo felt softer now, like damp wood. And every time Audrey blinked, the camera in the image seemed a little closer to her side of the frame. Audrey no longer questioned the house's reach. It had settled inside her, subtle at first, like a second heartbeat beneath her own. The photograph on the wall no longer needed light to be seen. Even in the deepest dark, its image remained visible. Elise, Audrey, and now the boy. Faint but clearer each night. His features came into focus slowly, hair falling over one eye, lips pressed in a silent thought, hands folded in his lap. He didn't look afraid. He looked aware. The voice returned, not whispering, not taunting, but narrating. All of us came by choice, even when we didn't know it yet. At school, Audrey's notebooks filled with drawings she didn't remember making. The spiral became more intricate, layered now, interwoven with doorways and lenses. Her handwriting shifted subtly sharper at the corners, cleaner. At night, her dreams lengthened. She no longer dreamed as herself. She dreamed as the camera, watching, blinking, keeping. Then the mask appeared again, not in her sleep. On the hallway wall between her bedroom and the bathroom, not hanging, reflected, in a place where no mirror had ever been. A perfect porcelain mask suspended in the glass eyes, glowing faintly red, unmoving. She touched the wall. It was flat, but her reflection was wrong. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood Elise, motionless, smiling, hands resting lightly on her shoulders. Audrey turned quickly, no one there, but when she looked again, the image had changed. Now Audrey stood in the chair, Elise behind the lens, the boy seated in the corner, and the spiral now etched into the glass itself. Her parents noticed her changes. They thought she was slipping away. She wasn't. She was shifting. One night she packed a small bag and left. No note, no noise. She walked through the neighborhood like she was tracing a dream, following the same pull Elise once did. Ocean Avenue welcomed her. The porch light was already on, the door already ajar. Inside, the house was warm, breathing. She stepped in, up the stairs, down the hall, into the sewing room. The chair was waiting. So was the camera. She sat, smiled, and the house exhaled. The camera clicked the moment Audrey settled into the chair. No countdown, no delay. It recognized her now, accepted her. The shutter's sound echoed once deep into the bones of the house like a bell rung underwater. The room dimmed, not from light fading but from the walls pulling inward, gathering themselves around her in a quiet, reverent hush. Across from her the lens blinked once more, and behind it Elise stood, not fully solid, not fully gone. Half in shadow, half in the frame, she moved with the certainty of someone who had watched many arrivals. Audrey didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her memories were already bleeding into the floor. The spiral beneath the chair pulsed, gently sinking with her breath. And behind her eyes she saw them all. Nolan, Charles, Elise, the woman in the mask, all in their places, all in their roles. She understood now. This wasn't haunting. It was hosting. And the house never forgot its guests. The walls of the sewing room rippled. The frames lining them shifted, new photos developing in real time. Audrey, at age 6, laughing in a park. Audrey, at age 9, looking into a mirror that now showed something else. Audrey, at 12, drawing a spiral on her bedroom wall in pencil, unaware. The house had been watching long before she ever stepped inside. It had called her, softly, repeatedly. Now it was remembering her in full. The camera clicked again. Elise stepped aside. The masked woman entered. No sound, just presence. She stood behind Audrey, resting one pale hand on her shoulder. Audrey didn't flinch. She felt warmth, connection. The mask leaned close and whispered a single word, keep. In that moment, the camera flash burst silently, not with light, but with memory. The image formed before it even printed. Audrey smiling. The mask behind her. The spiral glowing beneath. Her hands now resting on the arms of the chair like she had always been there, like she had always belonged there. And in the reflection of the lens, the hallway door opened again, because someone new had just stepped inside the house. The new arrival didn't knock. No one ever did. The house didn't require invitation, only awareness. His name was Leo, 24, a documentarian fresh off a podcast about urban legends. He'd heard whispers of Amityville's silence, not the murder, not the Lutzes, but what came after. The blackout, the disappearances, the scattered reports that never made it past message boards and footnotes. That's what drew him in. Not ghosts, not headlines, gaps, stories that left things out. He came with a camera crew of one, his friend Maya. They crossed the threshold at noon. The air inside wasn't cold or stale. It was still. Leo whispered, "Start rolling," and Maya raised her phone, already recording. The first floor was as expected, dusty, stripped of furniture, echoing softly with every step. They spoke quietly into their mics, narrating, but the audio would later be found empty. Only one sound survived on the recording. The click of a shutter. Recurring. Distant. Upstairs the hallway stretched wrong. Longer than they remembered. Narrower. A sense of compression, as though the house had tightened to focus. They reached the sewing room. Leo went in first. Maya followed, then stopped. Because in that room the camera was already powered on, framed, set, and in the chair sat a girl, eyes red, hands folded, smile faint. Audrey. She didn't move, didn't blink. Leo whispered, "Hello." No response. The camera turned toward him on its own. The lens focused. He raised his own camera to take a shot, but his screen only showed static. Then a frame appeared, a photograph he never took, of himself, standing behind the lens, and Audrey behind him, one hand raised as if reaching for his shoulder. Maya screamed, not loud, just once. Leo turned. Maya was gone. Only her recorder lay on the ground, screen cracked, still blinking. He backed away, heart pounding, breath sharp, but the hallway behind him had closed, replaced by black wall, and ahead the camera clicked again, this time slower. Final, and Audrey finally stood. Audrey rose from the chair, with the grace of something not entirely human anymore. Not possessed, not overtaken, evolved. The spiral on the floor dimmed, having served its purpose. Behind her, the masked woman receded into shadow, folding herself back into the corners of the room like smoke returning to the baseboards. Audrey stepped toward Leo, her movements calm, precise, as if rehearsed through the memories of others. Leo stood frozen. The camera turned on its tripod, tracking her with mechanical patience. It clicked once. The room breathed. Photographs on the walls shuffled silently. changing order, rearranging timelines. Elise appeared in one, Charles in another, Nolan in several, Audrey in all, and now Leo beginning to form his silhouette, smudged into the silver emulsion like a spirit developing slowly in a dark room. "Where's Maya?" he asked, voice hoarse. Audrey didn't answer with words. She lifted her hand and pointed to the far corner of the room. There on the floor lay a photograph. He stepped forward, trembling, picked it up. It was Maya, but not as she had been. She stood in the hallway, mouth open in mid-scream, eyes wide not in fear, but in understanding. Behind her, the spiral glowed faint as ember. In her hands, a camera. One Leo didn't recognize. He looked back toward the chair. It was empty again. The camera now faced him. He stepped away slowly, heart hammering. The walls pulsed. The hallway reopened. He turned and ran, feet thudding against wood that no longer felt stable. The air thickened. Shadows shifted. Stairwells tilted. And as he burst through the front door and stumbled into the sunlight, the porch light flicked off behind him. He didn't look back, didn't speak, didn't stop driving until dawn. But the photo followed. When he returned home, it was waiting on his pillow. A new image. Leo in the sewing room, seated, smiling faintly, camera before him, Audrey behind, and in the reflection of the lens, Maya, framing the shot. Her eyes the same deep red the house remembered, and the spiral no longer glowing, now closed, complete. The house had kept them all, and outside behind the black windows of 112 Ocean Avenue, the porch light blinked once more, welcoming, inviting, waiting. And now that our journey through Amityville has ended, let's allow the house to sleep once more. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and feel your body sink a little deeper into rest. The soft hum of memory lingers, but there's no need to carry it with you. Let the creaking floors quiet. Let the spirals stop spinning. The camera has blinked its last image for tonight. You're safe now. No shutter clicks in your room. No footsteps in your hallway. Just the soft breath of silence and the rhythmic beat of your own pulse returning to calm. Let your hands relax. Unclench your jaw. Let your breath fall into that natural, slow rhythm. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. The house may remember, but you don't have to. Let the lights dim behind your eyes and the pictures fade. There are no more photographs tonight. Only dreams, quiet, gentle, and yours alone. You've listened bravely. You've stayed to the end. And the house, it's full now. It will sleep, and so will you.